Oh, and Robin, that's a beautiful background. It looks nice. So chapter 32, we are, let me put this on bigger, learning all about love. It's almost like a pause in the Tanya, where the main aspect that we've been studying in Tanya is about bettering our conscience, bettering our insides, bettering our discipline, which is the Bainani, but then also bettering, trying to get into the emotions of it and trying to get into the mindset of it. And then every now and then we have to troubleshoot when there's things that come up that make us feel disgusting, make us feel guilty, make us feel shameful, make us feel two-faced or hypocritical. We have to learn how to troubleshoot and realize that the most important thing is joy. And all those feelings are really just the tricks of the Yetzer Hara, the tricks of the evil inclination to try to pull you down, because it's going to lead into a vicious cycle. And then the guilt, you want to numb yourself, and then you do something else, and then you're going to feel even worse. It's all part of it. And then finally was dealing with apathy, what we call in Hebrew timtum alev. And we said one of the main things we have to do is realize how we have to focus more on our soul than on our body. And that was a main theme in chapter 31. And for that, now we go into chapter 32, where we say, if you have that priority straight, where we are connecting more with our soul, and that is the primary, that is the principle of who we are. And yes, there is the body that has needs, but that's not what identifies me. Meaning the steak I eat, or whether it's the veggies I eat, that's not what makes me who I am. Who am I? I am my soul. I am an eternal being, connected infinitely with God. And yes, I have a body that has needs, and I have to take care of them, but that's not who I am. There's a beautiful quote from Hayom Yom, which is like a daily wisdom from the Rebbe. And he says, when two Jews meet, it's like two godly souls versus one animal soul. Because when the two of them come together, their souls connect, but their animal soul, their godly soul is connecting, but their animal soul remains to itself. It doesn't want to connect with another animal soul because it couldn't care less. Any other soul, any other animal, any other body is a threat to me. Because like we gave the example, if there's only one slice of the pie left on the table, it's either going to go in my stomach or it's going to go in yours. So you are a threat to me. You're a threat to my attention that I could be getting, and it's going to you. Or like we said in Shul and the Kiddush. So it doesn't look to partner with other animal souls, other nefesh habahamis. Whereas the godly soul is 100% connected with the other one, with another soul, because it's all one. It all comes from one Father, from God, and it all comes from one super soul, so to speak. And it just goes into different bodies, but we're all one. So when we get together, we're united. We're reunited, I should say, which is an incredible theme. And therefore, if we look at ourselves as a soul, then we'll see other people as souls also. And at that point, you're not a threat to me. What's good for you is good for me, because you're part of me and I'm part of you. So this answers an incredible question, where the mitzvah in the Torah says, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," which means I shall love you as much as I love myself, which seems impossible. So there's many commentaries that explain what this means. It means you should try, you should discipline yourself, even though it's not possible. Meaning you can't love you, another person, as much as you love yourself. But you should try, you should have that discipline to make the attempt. And there's different answers to it also. But now the Tanya, it's a revolutionary idea that not only is possible, it should be your normal way to love someone as much as you love yourself, because you look at them like your brother. You look at them like an extension of yourself. Just like the example I gave last week of a parent and a child, where you're just thrilled when your child eats for you and you almost feel like you ate it. The same is also when you look at another Jew, you should have that same mentality, because you're looking at yourself as a soul. So the knee-jerk reaction when you look at yourself from a soul, and therefore you see the others as a soul, you see yourself as all one. Therefore, you're not a threat to me. And this also explains the statement of Hillel, who says that the entire Torah, he tells the prospective convert, the entire Torah is to love another person. And really, that doesn't make sense because, like we explained last week, there's mitzvahs between me and you, and then there's mitzvahs between me and God. So the mitzvahs between me and you, it makes sense that the foundation to all of them is love your fellow. But there's mitzvahs between me and God, like Shabbat and kosher and tefillin. All those are between me and God. Nothing to do with you. It has to do with my personal connection with God. So how could love for your fellow be the foundation to that as well? But now it all makes sense, because if you're looking at yourself from the theme of a soul, then when you're loving someone else, it's actually part of the mitzvah of loving God. It's all part of one big foundation. That was the first section of chapter 32. And I'm dividing it basically into two sections. Now we're going to get into the second section. And that's where we're up to today, where what if a studious disciple who's learning Talmud and says, wait a minute, I could quote from you from the Talmud that I shouldn't be loving everyone, even though the Torah says, love them like you love yourself. But what about someone who is doing things that are wrong, is a sinner? Where the Talmud says, quoting from the Torah, the verse says, "Hochiach tochiach samisecha," that you shall rebuke. You shall certainly rebuke your colleague if you see them doing something wrong. You can't stand by and say it's not my business. You have to care for them. You have to rebuke them. And if they don't listen, the Talmud adds onto that verse that it's a mitzvah to hate him, to stand up and say, I'm not going to accept this behavior. And not only that, but to go to the teacher and rat him out and say, you should know that on the outside he looks all nice and polite, but you should know what's going on inside. So the Talmud says you should not only hate him, you should even tell his teacher about what he's doing. So how does that add up with what we're learning now about look at yourself as literally one being, one soul? It seems opposite. So this is where we're up to, where that only applies when it's your colleague, which means he's also a studious type. He's also a student of the Talmud and a student of Torah and been immersed in text of Torah and the conduct of Judaism. And still he couldn't care less, where you told him you shouldn't be doing this. And you told it to him again. You told him respectfully. And he says, I don't care. I'm doing what I want. And have a nice day. Then you have to change your attitude towards him, and you can't just be all loving to him. So that's one of the basic ideas, and we'll try to stay honest to the text. So we will continue on inside. Any questions before we jump into the text?
Yes, I have a question, Rabbi. Of course. So you're saying that if someone is behaving in a way that you really don't like and you think that they're wrong or whatever it is, or you, first of all, as another human being, are you not judging them? And is that not even worse than accepting? And number two, oh my gosh, I forgot what I was going to say. Yes, like you should just, I think I'm asking about, are we just not to accept that person and give them loving kindness anyway, and just, no, I can't change them. I can only change myself. And so they can be them and I can be me. But really, is it suggested that we quote unquote hate that person because they're being who they are?
Yeah. So to answer your second one just right away, that's actually going to be the main theme of today, to see how you still have to love him. Don't use that text from the Talmud. That's the question. The Talmud says you shouldn't love him. So this second half of the chapter is actually explaining to you really how to understand that quote from the Talmud. Then the main point of today would be to show you that no, that doesn't fall into the category of someone that you have to hate. On the contrary, you have to show him even more love.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we didn't get to it inside, but that will be, I think, one of the main themes of the day, and we'll see that. But I don't think I answered your first question. Do you mind, Maddie, just asking your first question again?
Don't think I can remember what it was.
About judging. Are we judging?
Judging, that's it. Thank you.
Remind me.
Are we not judging another being when we are thinking, well, they're behaving really badly? Is that not worse because we're judging someone than just accepting them? That was my question.
Yeah, interesting. So I do like that question. I'm curious to know what other people think. But by default, if you really want to love other people, you want to make sure they're doing the right thing. Like my children, I tell them all the time, you're not allowed to do this, or you could do that, or I'm always putting them on the right place and trying to guide them in the right path. So it's about correcting them. If it's someone you love, you want to make sure they're doing the right thing, and that's why dealing with family is the hardest, right? Because you love your family so much, you want to change them, and that's when it can get so frustrating, right? That's why there's a lot of times disagreements within family, whether it's at the Thanksgiving table about politics or whether it's about religion, where there's one more observant, one less observant, and the more observant one is trying to get the less observant one more to do because they love him. They want you to see Judaism the same way. So my answer, I guess, is twofold. First of all, it's really hard not to judge. I'm not condoning it, but just by nature, that's what we do. So when you are judging, we have to learn and to navigate how you have to judge correctly. And it's interesting. We quoted this from the Ethics of the Fathers, Maddie, a couple of weeks ago, where it says, you shall judge your fellow favorably. It doesn't say don't judge your fellow negatively. It almost seems like you're going to judge him. Which way should you judge him? Judge him in the positive sense. But it almost seems you're going to judge him, but just make sure it's a positive judgment. So it's interesting. I don't know if this is not coming from a source or a commentary. I'm just kind of saying this on the whim, where it doesn't say don't judge your fellow negative. It says judge him favorably. Instead of saying don't judge him, it says judge him favorably. So it almost seems like it's unavoidable.
Yes. And the other thing I was going to say was that, and this is a bit controversial, I guess, but I completely understand what you're saying as a parent. Like, you want your kids to be doing the right thing in hypotheses, but who are we to know what the right thing is for another human being? Because if we're all on our own path and we're all learning the lessons we need to learn, then just because I think something is the right thing doesn't mean that it's the right thing for the other person. So, and again, if I'm only coming from my experience in life and looking through my eyes at the world, the way I see it, I'm living amongst people that have had an incredibly different background from me, a different upbringing. Like, maybe they didn't have parents, or maybe I don't know, maybe they just didn't have the role models in their life as they were brought up. So they're navigating their way through life, doing what they think is the right thing. And I'm doing my thing, what I think is the right thing. And just to be very quickly, I just remember years ago, my dad said to me to do something. And he said to me, honor thy father and thy mother. And I was like, Dad, why are you saying that to me? That's really trying to control me, because I don't agree with what you're saying, and it's not fair that you're saying that to me. So there's something about, I don't know this. I find that this is quite an interesting discussion, and I don't want to take up more time about it, but just the whole concept of knowing how can one person know what the right thing is for another person if they're not your children, you're not like training them in terms of like bringing them up?
That's a very good question. We don't know, unless if they're Jewish and it's about Judaism, by nature, by default, it is the right thing for them, meaning they may not know it, but inside their neshama, it's the right thing, and it's something that they need, the nutrients for their soul. But other than that, you're right. We don't know what's the right thing and what's not. You're right, 100%. And I think, Maddie, we talked about that, a couple months ago, that idea of we don't know how they grew up. We don't know their background, and therefore we shouldn't. Yeah, you're right.
Thank you so much. I'm just curious about these things. So thank you for answering.
Of course,
I think Shira put basically the answer in the chat, that we have the Torah to guide us, because you can't judge on, there's a lot of things that you can't judge on because you don't know the person's background, where they're coming from. But we're referring to things that are pretty basic, that are like in the commandments in our Torah. That's what we want to judge and use as a guide.
Beautiful.
I think.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you, Ava, for quoting that. Then also the other comment that Shira put, whoops, I just lost it. The argument for the sake of heaven comes to mind when we rebuke someone for truly doing wrong. So let's see it inside it. We could debate about it, but let's see what the quote is like inside. So if you're looking in the book, it's on 364. We're actually just going to review a few lines that we already learned last week and the week before, and then jump right into the new teachings. I'm going to share my screen. So if you're looking inside, it's on 364. If you're looking on the screen, it should be up right now. I'm just going to back up one page, and it'll get us to section 3, which says, does this apply to everybody? While the Torah warns in general against harboring hatred for another, like it says, do not hate your brother in your heart, the rabbis taught that it is obligatory to show contempt towards a sinful person. So that's what we're going to quote now from the Talmud. And as for the Talmud's teaching that if you witness your friend sinning, it's a mitzvah to show contempt for him. And you should also inform his teacher so that he can show contempt for him as well. This ruling, so this would seem to be a question to everything, a contradiction to everything we learned. So he answers, this ruling is a very limited application, as we shall see. Sefer Charedim, a codification of the mitzvahs by Rabbi Elazar Askari from the 16th century, adds an important stipulation to the Talmud's position. If you see a person commit a sin and you rebuke him respectfully, but he does not cease, it's a mitzvah to show him contempt. This means that showing contempt to the sinner is a requirement only where A, the sinner has been rebuked, and B, he fails to listen and continues to sin. This in turn imposes a further significant limitation, since the requirement to rebuke a sinner is only applicable in a particular scenario. The Torah states you must repeatedly rebuke your associate, which in Hebrew is the word amisecha, your colleague, your associate, and your associate is interpreted to mean one who is like you. If he is like you in obedience to mitzvahs, you are to rebuke him when he sins. But if he is not, you are not called upon to rebuke him. So as the Tanya will now clarify, the Talmud's view that it is a requirement, a mitzvah, to show contempt to a sinner only applies when 3 conditions are present. Number 1, the sinner is a Torah observant person. Number 2, you have rebuked him respectfully. And number 3, he doesn't listen to you. So if he's like you, like your associate, which means he's equal to you in similar to your background and your upbringing in mitzvot and observance, and you already did it respectfully to rebuke him, and he says, I couldn't care less, then it's a mitzvah to show him contempt. Because the Talmud's ruling applies not to any person, but specifically to your associate, your equal in full Torah and mitzvahs observance. And it also only applies to an associate towards whom you have already fulfilled the mitzvah. You must repeatedly rebuke your fellow. And this mitzvah of rebuking your fellow applies exclusively to someone who is like you in Torah and mitzvot, like we said before from Eliyahu Rabbah. And nevertheless, despite your attempts to respectfully correct his behavior, the person is not ceased practicing this sin. As stated in Sefer Charedim, like we stated above, that you respectfully rebuked him and told him to stop it. And he's not. And not only that, he's saying, I couldn't care less. And he's equal to you in your mitzvah, like we said just from the source before. Then you can show him contempt. So it's a very limited application of when it applies. These criteria are required to establish the intentionality of the sin. So this is answering a cool question. Let's just read this paragraph and see where it goes. These criteria are required to establish the intentionality of the sin. If the person is not like you in Torah and mitzvot, which means not educated and observant in Torah, then even his deliberate sins are considered as inadvertent ones. Even if he is like you, you cannot be sure that his act was intentional until you have clearly rebuked him and he fails to listen. Only at that point is there a rabbinic obligation to show him contempt. This is actually from the Rebbe. I think notes on Tanya usually is from the Rebbe. So just to explain that last part again, the Rebbe quotes from the Talmud where it says, a person who is not educated in Torah, when they sin, could you really blame them? We're not condoning their sin. We're not saying, oh, it's fine. We're not giving them the green light for not eating kosher. But if they weren't raised with it, how much really could you expect of them to be able to do it? It's an unintentional sin. Just like we know in law and everything, when someone does something unintentionally, they're not held to the same level of when they did it intentional. So the reason why, even if they why we're seeing the litmus test to see how are they educated, are they equal to you in your Torah mitzvot, and did you rebuke them, is because only then could you know if it's intentional or not. Because without that, you would assume that it's unintentional, and unintentional sins. What was the quote? Let's just go back to that quote. Unintentional sins are not held to the same caliber. Let's see that. Inadvertent sins, even by even his deliberate sins are considered unintentional sins. Even when he did something purposefully, you can't blame him in the same caliber. Okay, interesting. Let's get back in. But in the case of a person who is not your associate and lacks the real knowledge and education necessary for intentional sin, and is not close to you, and is therefore unlikely to accept your rebuke, there is no room at all for contempt, only love. And Maddie, this is what you were talking about, where it's someone who's doing something wrong, but you can't show them any contempt. Like it says, be of the disciples of Aaron, love peace and pursue peace, love all creatures, and bring them close to the Torah. That's a quote from the Mishnah, which means, and it's so incredible, if you really want to bring them close to the Torah, which is the end of this paragraph, it's going to come through love, not through contempt. Right? It goes together. Love all creatures and bring them close to the Torah. It's one leads to the other. When you truly show them love and they feel your love, only then will they want to know more. But if you're just going to show them the book and throw them the book without love, it's not going to work on them. Meaning that even those who are distant from God's Torah and his worship, which is why they are referred to as mere creatures, meaning they're not doing anything, having, I guess he's going to say it, having no merits on their own beyond the fact that they were created by God. Meaning that's their merit. They're created by God. What are they doing with that? Nothing much. But even them, nevertheless, you must draw them in with thick cords of love, which that quote is a quote from the prophets, from Isaiah. But it's just a beautiful paragraph where they don't have much and they're sinning, and still yet you still have to show them no contempt, only love. Only whom could you get away with this idea of showing contempt when someone who is equal to you in your observance and knows better, and you respectfully told them to stop and they said I couldn't care less, then you could show them contempt. But other than that, it's all love. And then perhaps with all this effort, you will be able to bring them closer to the Torah and worship of God. With all this effort, which means you make the effort internally to show them this love and to help them, maybe you'll bring them closer. Above,
I love this.
Awesome.
I love this. It answers everything. Thank you so much.
It's the Alter Rebbe. He's doing a pretty, it's so elaborate. I love it. Awesome. Above, the Tanya stressed that love for another ought to be unconditional. Due to all souls equal, root and source of the living God. Yet here the text stresses that there is a goal in extending love to the non-observant. Perhaps with all this effort, you will be able to bring them closer to the Torah and worship of God. Ooh, this is a good question. Before we were saying that it's a love that's not conditional. Right, that's what we began this chapter a couple of weeks ago by saying that it's an ava sheina tluya b'davar. It's a love that's unconditional. It's not dependent on anything. Does anyone remember? We quoted that from the Mishnah, Ethics of the Fathers. Does anyone remember who it gives as an example of this love? It gives an example of two men that they had unconditional love for each other. It was David Hamelech, King David, and Yonatan, his friend. That Yonatan, who was the son of Shaul, the king at the time, loved David. And even though Saul said, what are you doing? He's going to try to take the kingdom away instead of you. It wasn't dependent on anything. It wasn't, what do I get out of it? It was pure love. So it almost seems the question over here, I'm so curious to know what the answer is. We'll have to see on the next page. But the question, I think it's from, I'm not sure if it's from the Rebbe or I'm not sure where this is from, but the question is, before we were learning that it should be an unconditional love. In the previous paragraph, we said, if you put your efforts in the love for him, maybe you'll be able to draw them in and give them more Torah, which means when you meet someone, you meet a Jewish person for Coke or for coffee, Do you feel that you have to share some Torah with them in order for it to count as a positive, successful, productive meeting? Share something on the parasha, and then it was a successful meeting, or just spending time with them and finding out what's going on in their life? That should work. So the beginning of the chapter is clearly saying the second way, that just get together with them, and it's regardless of any Torah that's taught. Of course, the mission also says elsewhere that you should always bring Torah to the table and discuss Torah. But at the same time, I think this is such a foundational question. Are you in it for? Is it dependent on something? I'm going to befriend them because there's a chance that they're going to get closer to Torah, or I'm going to befriend them because it's unconditional. So it almost seems that in this chapter, it's going a little bit in both directions, where at the beginning it said it's more unconditional, and over here it says, hopefully you could even bring him back to Torah if you have this proper love in place. So which one is it? I hope the question is clear, because I'm going to go now to the answer. Is there a goal to loving your fellow, or is the love to be extended unconditionally? I think it's a great question. The answer is that both are true. Jewish identity is multi-layered. So the mitzvah to love your fellow is likewise multi-layered. So let's see the different layers. At the level of essence means the very fiber of our being, the DNA of our soul. A Jew is connected to God regardless of his or her level of observance. However, the manifest reality in the world as God created it is that a connection to God comes through Torah and mitzvot. So above, when the Tanya taught that love should be extended unconditionally due to every soul's equal root and source in the living God, we were speaking of love towards the Jew's essence. But here in stressing that perhaps with all this effort, you will be able to bring them closer to the Torah and worship of God, the Tanya speaks to the manifest reality, where a Jew's connection to God must be through Torah. Practically speaking, we need to incorporate both attitudes, to love each Jew's essence by virtue of their soul, but this must also lead to their manifest connection with God through Torah and mitzvot. Notes on Tanya, so I'm guessing that's also from the Rebbe. I find this to be such a classic Rebbe answer. I love this answer. I'm just going to give you a chance to linger on it, and if you want to screenshot the page if you don't have the book, because I think this answers a lot. So let's just give a moment, and we'll try to dissect it. So let's just analyze this a little bit, and if anyone has any perspective on this, I find this to be such a foundational point as well. We each have an essence of who we are. That DNA of our soul, which is a piece of God, can never be taken away from us. And therefore, when I look at you, I look at essence. I see God in you. And with that, it just brings a thrill to me. Like, how could I not bend over backwards to help you? I'll do anything for you, because you're an extension of me. So with that, it's unconditional, regardless of their level of observance, regardless of their literacy in Hebrew or whatever, they're equal in mitzvah. And therefore, and this, by the way, when you look at essence, in the 60s, when the Rebbe came out with a tefillin campaign to take over the world with tefillin for men and Shabbos candles for women, to bring peace to the world. And every Jewish man should put tefillin. And this was to help during the 6-Day War in Israel. It was an incredible thing. And Hasidim did everything they can to push it. But there was many other groups that thought it was crazy. And the Rebbe got a lot of pushback from other leaders. Not in the same caliber of the Rebbe, but leaders of their own communities, where they said, do you know what they were just doing? How could you extend the mitzvahs to them when look what they did before? But the Rebbe looked at them as an essence, as the very fiber of their being God, being a soul that is intimately connected with the living God. And in that level, when you're looking at essence, it's beyond what was yesterday or what will be tomorrow. Right now, you're perfect. And therefore, I love you unconditional. But then the Rebbe adds to that here. So they have the essence that we look at, and that thrill of seeing a part of myself in you, my soul connected with your soul. But then together with that, it's multi-layered, where there's also a part that soul needs to be in a manifest way. How is it in a revealed sense? How is it connected with God? It's going to be through Torah and mitzvahs. And therefore, you need to encourage them in their level of observance. It doesn't take away from the unconditional love that you need for their soul, from the essence of their soul. But you still have to also have the multi-layer, the second part, which would be bringing them closer to Torah and mitzvot, because that's the open connection that they would have to God, and that's equal for all of us here, where we have that open connection to God that comes through Torah and mitzvot. So, for example, we need our vitamins and we need our Torah and mitzvot to keep our soul flourishing, to keep it healthy, to keep it strong. And for that, you have to help someone else with their Torah and mitzvot. But deeper than that, there's the essence. And at that essence, it's above and beyond their level of observance. I hope that was clear. Let's continue the next paragraph. I left out one paragraph to this section. So we're at the bottom. If you're looking on the Kindle, it's the bottom paragraph. And if you are looking in the book, the Practical Tanya, it's on 367 now. And then I'm going to quote a Hasidic thought that it has here. And if not, if you didn't succeed in bringing the person closer to Torah and worship of God, you still didn't lose the reward of observing the mitzvah of loving your fellow, which is carried out unconditionally. So you have to show that love. But even if you didn't succeed in bringing them closer, but you succeeded in the mitzvah of loving your fellow, because that's unconditional. I think that's beautiful. We're just going to pause for a second, and I'm going to read a Hasidic thought that is on the bottom of 366 that goes together with this section of Tanya. If you have it inside, that's great. If not, no worries. I'm just going to read it and try to listen. If I make my body, an animal soul, the main thing in my life, everything will be interpreted through the lens of personal gain and a win-lose mentality. So the example I gave before, if there's one piece of the pie left, I either get it or I don't. Either I get it or you. So it's a threat. That's when you look at life through the lens of my body. My animal soul sees itself as a helpless fragment in an alien universe, disconnected from its divine source and from other souls. So it constantly seeks to enrich itself with no real concern for another. But when I have my divine soul, on the other hand, has the attitude of win-win. It knows that everything which happens to me is shared in some way with others, because the universe is an integrated system. It's a mistake to see whatever happens as something purely personal, because that's not the actual reality. It's amazing. I think that's a beautiful thing. So just from on the freeway, when a person is driving reckless, they say, I could do what I want. It's my car. But no, you're responsible because of everyone else driving next to you. So my soul, it's not just about me. It's about an integrated system. So whatever is happening within me, I want to share with you. And whatever is with you is a win for me, because we're all one. That's such a foundational aspect to this chapter 32, and we'll finish the chapter today, which I'm excited about, on the section 4, which is on 367. And Maddie, I love as you're saying it. My joy is your joy, and your joy is my joy. Great quote. We are all connected. Are we always forgiven for unintentional sins? No, that's through teshuvah. Through teshuvah, we get forgiven. So even unintentional sins, but the sin was done, the mistake happened, and you need to you have to have a correction. It's an easier teshuvah, and the Talmud actually in Tractate Yuma, which talks about Yom Kippur, and it's mentioned in a different part of Tanya called the Geras HaTeshuvah that the Alter Rebbe wrote later in life. The Alter Rebbe quotes this section of the Talmud where it says if a person committed an unintentional sin or an intentional sin, the level of teshuvah that has to be done. But usually unintentional sins still need teshuvah. And by the way, just interesting, the Talmud over there in Yuma says that a person who does teshuvah could transform their sins to be counted in their merit as mitzvahs. But the teshuvah has to be a teshuvah out of love. There's two ways of how we do teshuvah. We do teshuvah out of fear. Oh my gosh, how could I do that against God? But if you do teshuvah out of love and joy, meaning I feel so close to God, and I want to be even closer. And I'm not going to, this is not the theme of the class, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But when you do teshuvah from ava, which love, then everything that was done wrong is actually considered as a power of merit on your scale, which is just an amazing thing. We'll save that for a class closer to Yom Kippur. How about that? Okay, section 4, how to relate to intentional sinners. So this is a good part. And in the above case of sinning individuals who are close to you and on par with you in observance, whom you have rebuked, but they have not stopped sinning, towards whom, as we learned above, it's a mitzvah to show contempt to them. So don't think you could let loose. That doesn't mean you should just show contempt to them, since there's also a mitzvah to love them too. So you can't ignore the mitzvah to love them. The mitzvah to love is still there, even when you're showing contempt. So Maddie, to answer your question before, this is an entirely different perspective. It's not, now I'm done with the mitzvah of love. Now I'm just going to show contempt. At the same time, you still have to show love. So the question obviously is, how could a person have two contradictory engagements with the same person? So, but both emotions are valid. Contempt because of the evil in them, and love because of the component of good which is hidden in them, which is the spark of God within them that energizes their divine souls. So in addition to love and contempt, hold on, let's just answer. So you have to have contempt to the negative parts of them, meaning to the actions that are unworthy, but you have to love the divine spark that's in them. So I don't know, I'm going to put it in other words. I don't know if this is accurate to the text, but it's almost, you still have to love them and hate their actions. Meaning if they did something wrong, you have to hate what they did. You have to hate the part of them that got them to do it. But that's not them. Them, you still have to love. The essence of their being, the divine spark embedded in them, is still fully pristine. And that you still have to love. It's a piece of God. The actions they did, that's something you should. So the wording, I hate that person. You can't hate that person. You could hate the person's actions. You hate a part of what they did. But I love that person because that person has a divine spark.
Yes, this is what we talked about last week with forgiveness, that
exactly.
you don't have to forgive the behavior, but if you forgive the person, then it's going to set you free and set them free, and you can just focus on the love of the soul rather than what they're actually doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie. And now, so the next part, he's going to get into compassion and empathy for them. So let's see that inside. And good, we're covering some good ground today. So we're towards the bottom of the Kindle on the page. And if you're interesting in the book, we're not going to get into it, but there is a star, which is pretty rare in the practical Tanya in the book on 367 at the bottom below the line. It looks like there is a footnote also from the notes of Tanya. Cool. We will skip it over for now. So we're on 368 if you're looking inside. In addition to love and contempt, the Tanya now introduces a third emotion, which is compassion. So love and contempt, we said you have to have at the same time. Contempt for the evil in them and love for the divine spark within them. But now a third part to this is compassion. And if you remember, we've spoken before about the different characters, or in Hebrew, midot, feelings of a person. We said there's love on one side, there's justice or discipline, which over here is where contempt would come from on the other side. That's like the two sides of a person. Kabbalistically, every part of our body is relating to a different character, or also mirroring a different power of God, sphira. The right side of us, the right arm, is the power of love. And that's why for most of us who are righties, we embrace stronger with our right hand. You're supposed to discipline with your left hand, because that's the weaker arm. That's where the contempt or discipline should come from. But now there's a third component, which is the perfect blend or combination of the two, which is compassion. And that's how they could be reconciled. So let's see that inside. Through compassion, the two contradictory emotions of love and contempt can be reconciled. Also, you ought to arouse compassion in your heart for that person's divine soul, because it is a divine soul exiled amid the evil of the Sitra Achra, which in the case of Rishayim overpowers the divine soul, right? If you remember, we spoke about the tzaddik as someone who vanquished their animal soul. And then you have the Beinoni, who has both pretty strong, and he's working to control his behavior of his animal soul. And then you have the Rasha, who is compromised, who is weakened, which means the animal soul is overpowering the divine soul. So on such a person, he deserves your compassion because he has such a bigger struggle than you. And compassion has the effect of neutralizing contempt and awakening love. By the way, this sentence, unbelievable. As is known from the verse, to Yaakov who redeemed Avram. So before we get to Yaakov and Avram, this idea, how many times you see someone making noise during services or whatever in the restaurant, and you can't stand it. You're like, what type of person is it? He's a lunatic. What is he doing? But then the waiter comes and says, oh, he has special needs. And then all of a sudden, you think you're so happy that he's making his noise. You want to protect him, that no one else should offend him or judge him. But a minute before you were judging him yourself and you were so mad at him. But all of a sudden, compassion takes away any anger you had. That's what compassion does. It's an amazing thing. I forgot which rabbi. There was a rabbi coming back. A rabbi just commuting in New York, and he saw a father with like 5 little rascals on the subway. He rides the subway every day, and one day there was a young father with 5 little kids, and the father wasn't even stopping them. They were making noise. I don't know if you've been on subways, but there's these big poles that people hold onto in the middle, and the kids are swinging on it and knocking into each other, knocking over other people's bags and backpacks. And this man was so mad. And the father wasn't doing anything. So he said he's gonna take it into his own hands. And the rabbi writes that he went to him and he says, excuse me, could you take care of your children? And the man, the father looked like he was in a daze. Like he was like totally not even there. And he like kind of shakes out of it and he says, I'm so sorry. I wasn't even paying attention. They're having a very tough day. We just buried their mother. And I don't even know what to do next. And he couldn't even, like, he was taking subways to and from, and everything changed. This man wanted to give them everything. And I don't remember the end of the story right now. It's just, I remember reading it a few years ago, and so powerful how everything changed in one moment, from such anger to this person disturbing my commute, to feeling like the world has to stop to help this person. Compassion took over totally. So obviously that's a much harsher example that I'm giving, a much heavier, but on a similar scale, a person who when we say, how do you reconcile contempt for the evil that they have, but love for the good? It comes through compassion. Compassion has that power that you're not happy with their behavior, but you love them even more now. It's a very, very powerful point that is the perfect synthesis of it all, which is compassion. So let's see it inside. I haven't read this part. I don't remember reading this part well when I prepared it. So he quotes a beautiful verse over here from Isaiah. Isaiah lived, 800 years or something after, no more, probably 1,000 years after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But Isaiah quotes a verse. He lived during the times of the temple's destruction. He says this verse, Yaakov who redeemed Avram. Yaakov is Jacob. Avram is his grandfather, Avram is his grandfather. But they didn't really live many years together. Yaakov only lived 15 years in overlapping Avram's life. So what does it mean Yaakov redeemed Avram? Was Avram in some prison that Yaakov ran, bailed him out? What does it mean? So it's actually it's something deeper. Let's see, he's going to explain it. Yaakov is symbolic of compassion and Avram of love. In a situation of contempt, love can be restored and redeemed through compassion. When you feel sorry for someone who has harmed you, it tends to take away any hatred you might have for them. Compassion ensures that in most cases, contempt will be neutralized and love will triumph. By the way, you want some beautiful, powerful thoughts for the day? This is it. Okay, so let's just analyze this a little bit, and just then to get back to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, each one emphasized a different character. Avram emphasized love, open, hospitality, give to anyone. That was Avram. That's why his tent was open on all four sides, which is symbolic of our chuppah. When the Jewish couple gets married, there's no walls to the chuppah because it's supposed to be like Abraham's tent that was always open. That's what hospitality. Avram stood for love. He was ready to host anyone, right? He thought it was 3 Arabs that were coming, and he was happy to host them and begging them to stay as long as they can. It was really 3 angels, but he didn't know at the time. Yitzchak, his son, was the opposite. You have to know who you're giving to. It has to go to an appropriate place. If they're not deserving, they don't get. Let them earn it. Let them come here and get it. Yaakov. So even if we take Yitzchak out of it for an example, what happens if it's a person that it's just too hard to love them? They're doing something wrong over and over again. They should know better. You warn them respectfully and kindly, and they're not paying attention. So you have contempt for them. Yaakov teaches you that you should trigger the compassion component. That if you have compassion to them, it'll restore the love you have for them. It'll redeem Avram. Avram is about love. Yaakov is about compassion. When you feel it's a place of contempt, when you arouse compassion for them, love will resurface. Love will be restored. So it's trying to develop compassion. Try to see, like Maddie was saying before, what is it that brought them to do this? What is going on in their life now? What happened in their past? And when you have compassion for them, understanding them a little more, you'll actually be overwhelmed with love for them. And that's where the mitzvah to love still applies, even when there's a mitzvah to have contempt. I think that's a beautiful idea and message. We're still going to try to finish the chapter today. I think we're doing good. I'm just going to read this paragraph again. I find it to be beautiful. When you feel sorry for someone who has harmed you, it tends to take away any hatred you might have for them. Compassion ensures that in most cases, contempt will be neutralized and love will triumph. But when King David of blessed memory said, "With utter hatred do I hate them," as he was referring to the extreme case of highly educated heretics and non-believers that pose a threat to traditional Judaism, who have shed any manifest connection to Judaism and so have no portion in the God of Israel, which is a quote from Sanhedrin, as stated in the Talmud tractate Shabbat, beginning of chapter 16. So I don't know if he's going to explain it. I'm just going to pause here for a second. And just to tell you something just fascinating. Nowadays, the Rebbe started in the mid-'80s, 1984, a cycle of studying Rambam, Maimonides, every single day. And depending who you are and your level of commitment to it, you could either study 3 chapters of Maimonides a day, and if you do 3 chapters, you finish it in less than a year, the entire Maimonides, which is called the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam. And if you study 1 chapter a day, you'll finish it in 3 years. But there's also a very, very good level, which is to study the mitzvah of the day. And it goes through the 613 mitzvahs through the Rambam's details. And it's very detailed. So nowadays, we're actually concluding the cycle of Rambam next week, which also coincides with the Rebbe's Yartzeit. The 27th anniversary of passing of the Rebbe is the 3rd of Tammuz, which this year coincides with the celebration of the conclusion of the Rambam. So towards the end, one of the very interesting laws, it talks about, in Hebrew, their name is apikorsim. People who blatantly try to undermine Judaism, like Jewish people who do everything they can to destroy Judaism. The way it's the definition of a heretic is a person who believes only in the written law and not in the oral law, which means everything that we have tradition from Moshe all the way through, they don't want to keep. So everything from the counting of the Omer, which we've just concluded a few weeks ago, it says in the Torah, you should count the Omer from the morrow of the Sabbath. And the sages right away say that the Sabbath over there is not referring to the Shabbat of the seventh day of the week. It's referring to referring to Passover. But they actually will count the Omer on the Sunday after the first Sabbath of the year, which means they count Omer, these heretics, in October, because they don't believe in the oral law. So these are people that blatantly try to undermine what Judaism is. And Judaism is the written and the oral Torah. So David tell him, he said, David says that with an utter hatred, I hate them. Oh, and Steve, I'm sorry if you were saying something, I missed it. You could try that again. With an utter hatred. So who is he referring to? People who are in this caliber that try to undermine Judaism. And in the olden days, by the way, I don't know if you know, but this is just a cool thing about our Amidah. In our Amidah that I just finished when I davened this morning, it's called, in Hebrew, it's called the Shmona Esrei, which means 18 blessings. Because there's 18 blessings that were from the members of the Great Assembly when they made the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, when they made the Siddur, when they made the Amidah. But later on, an added blessing was an extra blessing was added. So there's actually 19 blessings, but it's still called 18 blessings, even though there's an extra blessing in there. The blessing that was added, if you read the words in English, it's like crazy. It's talking about may the informers, people in the times of the Romans, there were Jews who were trying to be more Roman than the Romans. And when Jews were studying Torah, which was forbidden by Roman law, they would inform the government. By the way, it's not so different from other times of history when also Jews took on a role of being on the front lines of protecting their government and trying to break the morale of the Jews. So it says they should be broken, they should have no hope, and they should be shattered. It's wording anyway that was instituted to be added into our Amidah. So that's who David's referring to over here when he says with another utter hatred. That's a very extreme circumstance, a very extreme case that is referred to by David. Let's see that inside. The Tanya stresses that this hatred is something which King David said because it is not something you should be practicing. When expressing righteous indignation for another person's actions, even though you appear to be taking the moral high ground, how do you know that you are not acting out of an impure motive? You may also have erred in judgment about your friend's heresy, which may in fact be nothing more than a benign short-sightedness. So maybe the guy made an accident, but you're going to come with an indignation and say, I'm going to stand up for Torah. Maybe he wasn't thinking that day. So you don't have the authority to be like King David and to know who's acting with out of heresy and who's acting out of space out or lack of education. If you act with contempt towards another person and you are wrong in your judgment, then you have hurt someone unjustifiably. But if you behave lovingly towards everyone, you are definitely doing a mitzvah, which is a great way to end the chapter, saying that this idea is so powerful, where there's a risk if you act with contempt. It may be right, but there's a big chance that it's wrong, because maybe the person is not equal to you in your observance, so therefore you have no rights to show him any contempt. And maybe you didn't do it correctly with respect, and maybe he just doesn't know better. And if you're sure that, no, I'm still going to show him contempt, what if it's wrong? Then you actually did something wrong. You did the sin of showing contempt to someone that you're not supposed to. But if you showed love toward him, then hands down you did a mitzvah. Because love needs to be, there's no stipulation of when you should love him. You should always love him. So then there's no worry of doing anything wrong if you show him love. We're going to read these. Actually, I see a practical, I'll just read the practical lessons at the end. It's a good way to summarize, and we'll squeeze in the questions as well. Practical lessons. If you make your divine soul the main joy in your life, you will find it easier to love your fellow as yourself. So your main primary being is your soul. And when you see yourself as a soul, you'll see other people that way also. You ought to love your fellow unconditionally. If you remember, we spoke about there's conditional love, that what do I get out of it? When I'm looking at them from my body and animal soul perspective, what do I get out of them? Is it self-serving or not? And then it's conditional. But when you love unconditionally, which is the love that comes from the soul, even if you find something contemptible in another person, it's still a mitzvah to love them. You love the good in them and detest the bad. Compassion has the power to neutralize contempt and transform it to love. So these were all beautiful practical lessons throughout the Tanya, throughout the chapter of 32. This is, by the way, just an incredible chapter. I hope you've enjoyed it, tuning into it as much as I enjoyed teaching it. I'm just going to go through some questions. You may never know the burden someone carries. That's why it's so important to treat people with compassion. Awesome. And exactly, Sharon, when you have that compassion, it has a way to bring that love for that person. And it looks like everyone's agreeing with you. I think we need to view ourselves as souls to meet the challenge of being compassionate towards a person who acts harmfully toward us. Exactly. It's hard, but that's why we have to have our times of meditation or davening and Shabbat, where we really rise up to that reminder that we are souls, what I call the lost people. Yeah. How about the class? A very short daily class. So, by the way, the best class, Mr. Berger is asking about a daily class on Rambam. Chabad.org, by the way, is updating an incredible site of daily study where you have everything on an app, all in one, where you could choose right away and you could speed it up. You could pause in middle and it will continue next time you get into the app. You could bookmark things for the daily study. So that's audio or video or text of Torah daily, which is that we have a daily Chumash section, a daily Tanya section. They go throughout the entire Tanya by the cycle of the year. So right now, if we were studying in cycle of the year, we would be in the month of Adar, which is what is usually studied. Usually chapter 32 is studied, but we're obviously doing it on our own schedule. But they have some great teachers. Rabbi Josh Gordon of blessed memory, he has a very famous class that is tuned into by incredible amount of people, and also so the Rambam is also going to be there, and there's a shorter class, longer class also for daily mitzvahs. The couples in concentration camps reported on other Jews, yes, and in concentration camps, and also in Russia, I think they were called the Vasexia, a group of Jews that bought into Mother Russia. To the point that the previous Rebbe, when he was arrested, who arrested him was actually Jews, whose grandparents were Hasidim of the previous Rebbe's grandfather, like their grandfather were Hasidim of the previous Rebbe's, but now in the 1920s, which is obviously when communism was the strongest, or very strong at least, it was totally changed. What app is that, Rabbi? Rabbi Josh Gordon. So just put in, if you have an iPhone or any app store, just put in Rabbi Gordon Daily Tanya, and he has an amazing app, but also a Chabad.org daily study, and they're in the middle of putting out an incredible. All right, we're going to stop there. Everyone have a great day. We have reached our time for the day, so hopefully we'll see you next week, and we'll continue chapter 33. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Rabbi.
Have a great day.
Rabbi.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.